buy, you won't have to pay for, but that we're going to be using throughout the course. So if I can get the sheet with everyone's name, emails on it, and I'll also send you the syllabus the same way. It'll be put in the Dropbox and people can download it at their leisure. And this is the syllabus that will be sent to you, and we'll go over it briefly together before it's sent to you. And there's maybe one or two things that will change on it. I have a friend coming from the U.S. who'll bring one of the textbooks that's not available here. He'll get here on Friday. So I've already added that one in, but there are one or two additional texts that will also be added in. So very briefly, the course description and objectives. We aim to introduce students to core principles, modes, patterns, and history of thought and knowledge production in Africa and the African world from antiquity to the present. Basically, we want you to understand the world view of African people throughout the world, so this is going throughout space and time. And one of the objectives is for you to acquire an understanding of the world view that undergirds African thought and philosophy, and how it fundamentally differs from the worldview, thought, and philosophy of others, meaning non-Africans. Also to understand the fundamental tenets and core principles, again, of that worldview, to explore relationship and common fundamentals of the worldview, and then also become familiar with innovative approaches to the study of African thought. All right? The format will combine lectures, discussions, class presentations. Also, you will present on what you learn. The main text, Person, Divinity, and Nature, that's in the same Google Drive folder and Dropbox folder. Again, I'll provide those links to the syllabus and to all of these texts. And what I will do, as you see, there are quite a few texts. What I have started to do but haven't finished is to delineate the page numbers. So you won't be reading the entire book every single week, a new book every week, but there are specific things that we'll focus on. For this week, this is week 1, and I know sometimes for the first class, the teacher will just give you the syllabus and say, go home. We have a lot of ground to cover, so this isn't one of those classes. What we'll work on is Chukwunyere Kamalu's Person, Divinity, and Nature. And this is the intro, pages 17 through 28. Again, you'll have this syllabus, but you can write it down if you so choose. And then also Theophile Obenga, Egypt, Ancient History and of African Philosophy, and Kwesuridu's Companion to African Philosophy. The other text that I mentioned that the friend would be bringing is going to be amazingly good, and you'll have access to this full text. African Philosophy, the Pharaonic Period, 2780 to 330 BCE. And then also, we want to get you started on the origins of African thought, origins of African philosophy, and that takes us to the Nile Valley, right? But when we think of the Nile Valley, what civilizations do we think of? We say Nile Valley. Kemet, Nubia, good. So Kemet, Nubia, Kush. So the first few texts are going to deal primarily with Kemet, but the fourth text, which is already in that folder on Nabta Playa during the early and middle Holocene, this goes further into the south, further into the interior of Africa, to the place called Nabta Playa, which at one time was very fertile, had a lot of grass, it was able to sustain livestock and a pastoral lifestyle. But over time, it became more of a desert, and it's thought that that desertification process is what caused people to move into the Nile Valley. One thing about Nabta Playa is that it features the very first calendar, astronomical calendar, and the necessity of that was because in this type of place where at certain times it would be very dry, at certain times the rains would come. It was necessary for the people to chart using stars when these changes in season would occur. So it was very practical for them to develop calendrical systems, and from that you find the rudiments of what later became Nile Valley civilization. So that's a text that you will read that really goes into the origin of some of these later civilizations that we now know as Kemet, Nubia, Kush, and so forth and so on. And well, let me go through this and then we'll go to the slides for this week. So we want to deal with the origins of African thought, and our initial discussion topic will be what is African thought, what is the African worldview, and how does worldview inform thought. As we're dealing with the origins of African philosophy, we will rely mainly on the introduction for person, divinity, and nature, and Theophilo Benga, Egypt, Ancient History of African Philosophy. That's in Redu. Again, this whole book is in there, but for this week you're only responsible for pages 31 through 49. And that's where the bulk of what we discuss for this lecture will be. Also, we'll briefly cover methods of research, primary research, and then we want to go straight into concepts of the person, rites of passage. And again, this draws heavily from the main text, Person, Divinity, and Nature. And it deals with birth, initiation, marriage, eldership, and ancestors. All right? So what does a person do? What is the course of life? Supplementary texts, which are also in your folder, are Self-Healing Power and Therapy by Kimbwandende Kia Bunzeki Fukiao, and Tangu Tandu Kolo, and also African Cosmology of the Bantu Congo. So we're dealing with African thought and African philosophy. So one thing you will notice right off the bat is we're not only dealing with Ghana, right? Also, we're not only dealing with West Africa. Also, we're not only dealing with what Ivan Van Sertima terms the 500-year box, right? Where we say, all right, only back to 500 years is what we'll discuss. We're going to go to the oldest documented systems of African thought, and we'll come forward from there. The second week is going to deal with concepts of the person. It will continue that idea, the person as multiple selves. And what we're looking for are commonalities that you find throughout the continent. So even where you see differences from this ethnic group to that ethnic group, from this people to that people, you'll find certain commonalities from all of them, by and large. And some of these deal with multiple selves of African thought, the destiny or spiritual double, the soul or breath, the heart, the ancestral guardian, the shadow, that all of these are seen as comprising the human being, right? These and more, and we'll give concrete examples from specific people that will make that clear. Again, we'll look at person, divinity, and nature, self-healing power, and therapy. Week 3, we'll deal with number, destiny, and divination, the diviner and the divination process, divination and traditional medicine. And again, this is following our primary text, but the supplementary texts are coming from Fundamentals of Yoruba Religion, Orisha Worship, Companion to African Philosophy. Again, there's a text that deals with Yoruba divination system, and then also one on Igbo cosmology, which is already in your Dropbox folder. After God is Dibia, Igbo cosmology, healing, divination, and sacred science in Nigeria. So again, we'll focus in on specific aspects that will help make this much clearer, right? Week 4, we'll deal with complementary opposites in ethics and morals, ideas of good and evil, freedom, destiny, and moral responsibility, conceptions of truth, order, and stability, personification of chaos and uncertainty in African myth. Again, we have our primary text. We have an exciting supplementary text, Listening to Ourselves. Has anyone come across this text before? This is a multilingual anthology, a short one, but it has African philosophical text written in African languages with translations into English. So it has Amharic written in the language, and then it has the translation. It has Luo, it has Wolof, it has Chi, and several others. So it's something very exciting in the sense that it's really pushing the boundaries of this idea that Africans have philosophy, but we have philosophy less right in our own languages, right? So we continue. From there, and we'll come to this, there's an issue thought paper that will also be due in week 4, and we'll explain what that will be. Week 5, we'll deal with divinity and nature, again following along the course of our primary text. And this deals with ancient and traditional accounts of the beginning of creation stories throughout the continent. So ancient Egyptian, Kemetic as we know, the Bambara of Mali, the Yoruba of Nigeria, Kuba of Zaire, now Congo DRC, Dogon of Mali, Fon of Benin, Igbo of Nigeria, and Somye also of what's now Congo DRC. We'll deal with common elements in African cosmology. Again, this is worldview, the primeval water, the life force, the void in the continuum, transmission of life force, the 4 primordial elements or ancestors, chaos and order, concert of opposites, divine intelligence, logos, and word. So we'll deal with person, divinity, and nature, cultural unity of Negro Africa, or Black Africa as the updated version was called. Medu Necha by Jacob Carruthers, Ma'at and Order in African Cosmology. There's actually another text that I want to add to this that we don't have in the folder yet, but which will be. That's again why I didn't want to today give you a printed copy, because there are a few small things that will change, but you will have access to this. Week 7, the Supreme Being, the divinities, and spirit forces. And this is again something that we're talking about African worldview you can find throughout the continent. Ideas of monotheism, polytheism, and pantheism. Ideas of aloofness of the Supreme Being in African thought, divinities and spirit forces, and the human being in relation to divinity. We have our primary text, and then also the Akan Doctrine of God by J.B. Dankwa. It's a very rare book, but this is also in your Dropbox and Google Drive folder. Week 8, Earth and Land in African Thought and Practice. Ideas of the ancestors as owners and living custodians of the land, agricultural cycle and ritual, dynamic interrelation of the human community and the environment. We'll deal with the transcendental cult of the earth, traditional agricultural practices, and then bringing more into recent times colonial land policy in Kenya and African alienation from the land. Basically the idea, if the land and the ancestors are so important, what happened when Africans were cut off from the land in settler colonization. Also dealing with earth-based spiritual, social, political, and economic systems. Class 9, class discussion dealing with the validity of African philosophy. This is, again, bringing us more up to date into more recent discourses. Again, our main text will also deal with African philosophy, Obinga's text on African philosophy, the Pharaonic period, and Redu, Companion to African Philosophy. And then again, coming to more modern times, animism as a modern belief system, person, divinity, and nature. Then also the Sankofa movement, re-Africanization and the reality of war. And this is going into Africans in the diaspora who practice African spiritual systems. For me, I'm a practitioner of African spiritual systems. So I poured a libation this morning. Did anyone pour a libation this morning? There are no points off your grade if you didn't. There are no points off your grade if you didn't pour a libation this morning. But I would recommend doing so if you want to do well in the class, just so you can say, I hope that this will go well. So for me, I'm coming to this course as someone who practices this, as someone who lives this, you know, in daily life. And the Sankofa movement, this is a group that also holds the Sankofa conference in DC, Washington, DC. And in it, they have Africans who come together to discuss some of these topics. But then also they have Akom, they have traditional spiritual ceremonies. This is the National Shrine of Africans in America. So it brings a different perspective, a very modern perspective in the sense of Africans who realize that our spiritual systems are to be used to defend ourselves in the current context of war that we find ourselves. Oh, I skipped one. Before week 9, you have a written examination, which is basically going to cover what we've covered up to that point. These are all in the violet purple. Week 11, chapter presentation and review. So you will choose one specific chapter. By week 10, we will conclude our main text, which is person, divinity, and nature, and we'll go to other texts. So at that point in time, we will have covered everything. You'll be responsible for a specific chapter and doing a short presentation on it, and the details of what will be entailed by that presentation are further below. For week 12, we'll bring in African thought in combat and military science, both in the continent and the diaspora, and go into some of the commonalities that we find, both on the level of army and individual, and then for the continent and the diaspora. And the readings there will be TJ-OB, Fighting for Honor, the history of African martial art traditions in the Atlantic world, where he goes into Angola, he goes into the Igbo of Nigeria, he goes into the U.S., African fighting systems such as knocking and kicking, also into capoeira in Brazil, so forth and so on. But one of the things that you find is that these things are not divorced from African spiritual systems or African philosophical systems. So when in capoeira, for example, the person is upside down, it's seen as they have gone metaphorically into the realm of the ancestors, and it's seen that the realm of the ancestors is a place where everything is basically the opposite as it is here. So whereas here we're upright, there they're upside down, and so forth and so on. So again, a lot of the worldview is found in what you would just say, oh, they're just moving around. No, you know, the fact that they're in a circle, what does that circle represent? What is the thought behind it? Also, Festus B. Abwaje, Indigenous African Warfare, its concept and art in the Gold Coast up to the early 1900s. Again, to make those bridges between what an individual does and the worldview of the individual in combat sciences versus what an army does, and show those correlations. There are military academies such as West Point and so forth that study, they have entire sections that are devoted to the study of Shaka, Zulu of South Africa, that are devoted to Hannibal of Carthage, and so forth and so on. So again, this is part of the African worldview and African thought. So even though they may not have been authors in the sense of them writing it down, the fact that they documented it through their actions, it shows a very advanced level of thought, to the point that, again, people are still studying this. Week 13, we get finally to African thought and the thought of non-Africans. We'll look at Yurugu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior, and then Cheikh Anta Diop, the cultural unity of Black Africa. And this is the text in which he brings forth the two cradle theory to explain distinctions between how Africans behave and Europeans behave by and large. Week 14, this is your community experience paper. You will come to find what that is. That means you will need to perhaps go visit your grandmother, your long estranged grandmother who you don't see in the village, or something of that nature. And then week 15, the battle for African philosophy, the battle for kimet. This is Intellectual Warfare by Jacob Carruthers. And this will close out the text that we'll be using. Then week 16 will be the final submission and presentation of the African thought paper. All right. So the course requirements and grading, attendance and class participation, that should go without saying. Also, you should be prepared to discuss topics in the readings along the lines that I've already briefly covered. They should also expect to relate to what was learned in class, that with your everyday life experience, and also to discuss how the readings are related to community experiences, personal experiences. And this will be part 10% of your grade. Community experience. In order to provide an experiential-based learning, students will be required to engage in some discussions with elders in their community as a means of getting examples of the thinking and philosophical understanding which undergirds practices in your community. So oftentimes we may look at these things as disconnected rituals without, again, seeing these core fundamental processes that go from tip to tip of Africa, from Dakar to Mogadishu. But once you can see these core philosophical principles, it makes all of these things start to make sense. Even though these people may use pito to pour libation, these people may use palm wine to do it, once you can understand what the thought undergirding it is, then you can see the commonalities over the differences. You should keep a journal of your community experience where you write down your thoughts, experiences, time spent with the community. Does anyone or has anyone gone to any type of traditional ceremony, spiritual ceremony, ritual, festival? Yeah. Okay. So you will be able to, present on.
Festival qualifies.
Yeah, festival will qualify. Festival will qualify. Written assignments, you have an issued thought paper, and each student is expected to write a 2 to 3 page type double-spaced thought paper on ideas stimulated by assigned readings for a particular week. You should be very precise in your discussion or argument. The best papers are those that will integrate ideas from the new readings and previous readings, or discuss the relationship between the new readings and previous readings, lectures, and so forth. Your presentation should include comments about how the article could be improved and what you basically like about it. Chapter presentation and preview, again, we'll deal with a different chapter each week as our core reading plus supplementary. So you'll select at that point one chapter from the course outline to present in class. This will be in 2 parts. You'll provide a clear and concise summary. Also, you will present verbally, and then you'll also be able to facilitate a discussion of the chapter. All right? That should be clear. You should also prepare questions to facilitate that discussion. The community experience paper, again, as we mentioned previously, this should describe how your experience relates to African thought. So if you see these people who are doing this, you can say, okay, this is the idea of complementary opposites. Okay, this is the idea of ancestors as guardians of the land. Oh, this is, basically trying to get at what the principle is behind the ritual or cultural practice. And then finally, the African thought definition paper. You're expected to write a paper on African thought to be chosen by you. You'll be expected to discuss African thought, making use of concepts, issues, and philosophies learned. And again, this is more broad. At each point, up to that, you're only responsible for what we've done up to this point. This is the final one. So all of these things should start to really gel together. And then finally, a written examination, which will be 20% of your grade. The format will be announced in class, but it will be mainly short answers. And again, what I'm looking for is an understanding, for you to demonstrate an understanding of what we're dealing with. Important notice on citations, I'll let you read that, but some of you were in the academic writing class. I saw some of you were able to use citation managers, and those who did, I saw they did very well. I saw others decided to try to just go off the top of their heads, and they had different citation styles. It looked like APA plus author date plus whatever, and that cost you on your final papers. So be cognizant of using these particular styles. Use the APA style modeled on this syllabus. Proper use and acknowledgement of other works. Be sure not to plagiarize. I shouldn't have to say that, but I will. And then grading. Papers will be graded on the basis of thoroughness and quality of response to specific requirements of the project. Integration of appropriate readings and African thought terminologies from the course into discussions, clarity, organization, and style. So is this clear? Are we okay?
A question on the presentation.
Yes.
We're not going to have to do it with PowerPoint, just verbal.
Yes, it's just verbal, but sometimes the PowerPoint helps. And I would highly recommend doing a PowerPoint.
And the thought paper.
Yes.
How formal should the language be in that, or it can be as stream of thought kind of writing?
Stream of thought, I'm not exactly sure.
Stream of consciousness kind of.
Stream of consciousness, let it flow.
Yeah.
That would be more for like the community experience paper. That would be more the format. for the thought paper, it should be more formal in terms of style. The community experience is your own experience, and you can even write that in first person because I did this, I met with this person, this was my grandmother, this is the oldest woman in the community who explained this, those types of things. All right. So yes, just in short, it should be more formal for the thought paper. However, you can include some of the things that you got in the informal paper, the community experience paper, if it's a quote that you got directly. And also take note that there are ways to cite personal communication, and there's a set style for that for each one, including APA. So that's included in note, which we discussed briefly here. This is what an APA citation looks like. It's already set to APA 6. But if I went to, for example, author date, then that's what it would look like. You'll see it. It looks like it's not responding when it changes. And of course, now that I want to do it on cue, it wants to not respond, so we'll come back to that. Okay. And this is what author date looks like. So notice the underline, notice the difference. Right. And again, as I mentioned in academic writing, for those who have me for academic writing, using a reference manager makes it so much easier. You just press a button and it switches. All right, but any other questions on the syllabus? I hope people are excited about this course. I'm excited about this course, right? I think that it will be an opportunity for, I'll say us. You'll learn that in a lot of African languages and thought systems, the same word for teach is the word for learn, or at the very least they're related. So you can say seba in maybe nature to learn or to teach. You can look at Jangale and Wolof and Jang, and those are related. Longuka, Longan, Kikongo, Ko is the exact same word in Yoruba. So I think that we will all get a chance to learn things that perhaps you've never learned before, and perhaps you may never have an opportunity to learn again, unless you decide, let me focus on this. So I really think it will be a big opportunity.
On the thought paper, like, would there be time for us to, as we go into communities, or just?
You will already have done that because the community paper is before the thought paper. So
the community paper is what I'm talking about. Like, would there be time to actually go into communities?
Yeah.
So, meaning we have a week off or something?
No, you won't have a week off. We only meet once a week. So that week in between Thursday is your week off. Okay? And one thing that I may try to organize, and I have to see what the logistics are because I haven't done this before with a class. In Kofuridvia, there's a shrine called Obotedri, and they have Akwezide. And that would be something that we can all go to together. I'm very close with the Okonfo, who is there, Nana Ba, as we call her, Nana Fwetedri. So she would be very open, and then other people who are part of that shrine, the Asofo, and so forth, would be very open to your questions. She helped in some of my linguistic research in the past, and then every year we bring people to her. So I think that that's something that's not too far away that would be something that would, I guess, take some of the pressure off of you to be like, who am I going to talk to? I don't like my grandmother. In my house, we call her, no, I won't say. But we'll get into today's lesson. And today's lesson, we're going to try to cover a lot of ground, as I mentioned before. And again, we're pulling mainly from the text from Theophile Obenga in Gredu on African philosophy dealing with ancient kimet. And then we'll also bring in the idea of the concept of the human being. I hope this comes up. Okay. All right, so for this, we'll deal with foundations of African thought. week 1, what is African thought, and then we'll deal with the origins of African thought. And depending on how much time we have, we'll already go into concepts of the person. You should be taking copious notes. I hope everyone has your pen. See. And as we come through, actually let me do this, because we're going to be here for 3 hours. I'm going to go pour some water, not your standard libation, and then I'll come. And then we'll get all buckled in. So take your chance to get ready as well, and I'll be right back.
Benedina, I'm glad you're here. I'm also glad you're here. I was going to be here. I was like, oh, okay. And then so interested. Oh, okay. Very interested, yes. Yeah, I mean, there's something similar to at least we're getting plus with the rest of it. I know nothing. Really doesn't. Egyptian really.
Which of these things?
The after the brown book with the what's it?
What I've read of beyond cultures and
Beyond cultures and the other.
Oh, really?
It's in the first one. Oh,
I know I've got some
wait for the
I still hear about it.
Still here, but
He's in South Africa. He's all around, right?
So he's left here?
Yeah, he's been at the
Oh.
yeah, he's left here. I met my chief. Yeah, it was alright. I know I was compared to my G2 was so the only class I had
Okay. So, this is, again, thank you. And I'll send the syllabus, also the link to all of the texts that we have. And there are quite a few texts in there. Some of them are very difficult to get, and some of them are even extremely expensive. But you will have access to those full texts. And this is Foundations of African Thought, as we mentioned. And we want to start off with somewhat of an informal discussion just to get a sense of where people are. So for you, and in your idea, what is African deep thought? What do you think of when you think of African thought, African deep thought? Do Africans have any thought? Are you African and are you thinking right now? This may seem like a rhetorical question, but it's not. I'm actually waiting for you to answer, and we won't go forward until you do.
I think it was right, so as it goes, central
So we should start here.
Yes.
Uncle Tu?
Let me get this in
We'll actually go into the reasons why we do things in the so-called counterclockwise fashion. This is again tied to African thought.
Well, I think that African thought has evolved through time. So, the capstone is academically is ethnophilosophers, and then that is in the 1930s and 40s. Those who began to write or wrote on the indigenous people, and I think as in medieval put is a kind of production of the colonial library for them. And so you have people, a group of the likes of Jimmy Dampa, Nkrumah, and these people that Jimmy Dampa produced texts mainly on the legal aspect. Nkrumah had to study the systems of thought, the system of so-called quote-unquote primitive people. And then you have
So just really quick, is that where African philosophy started?
not really. So if you have to go a bit into exoteric activities, then you have to go way back from to the Egyptians' systems of thought.
All right, let's continue. African thought.
I think they are saying what the African thinks about himself, what he believes about the activities he goes into.
That's very short and concise, but I like where you're going. Let's try to keep it concise. I want, what is African thought in one sentence for everyone?
In one sentence,
Yes.
I would say that it is that which informs the African issue.
Very good. So it seems to tie in with ideas of morality too as well.
The idea of communalism, shared life, group interest, the community interest, environmental interest, which does not necessarily tax the individual interest, but places it within the group interest.
Very good. It sounds very similar to concepts of Ubuntu, for those who may have heard of that. All right. Muntungu muntunga bantu. That a human being is a human being because of human beings. Very good.
I'd say like African thought is how Africans perceive themselves in the world around them. That's simple.
That's very good. How Africans perceive themselves and the world around them. Simple yet profound. I'm liking what I'm hearing from everyone. Please. African thought.
What an African thinks about herself, the universe, the cosmology, the earth, and how she relates to the world. So what he said about Ubuntu, I don't think that would come from right? I'm sorry, I had to just
All right. So the additional piece that I heard, other than the jab at your colleague, was this idea of relationship. So not only what we think about these things, but also the relationship that exists between them. All right. In the back, I'm not seeing. What is African thought?
It's okay, you can go ahead, I'll wait for you.
What is African thought in one sentence or less?
I think African thought is the lens through which I view everything by virtue of my being an African and how it informs how I see things around me because of that.
Very good. Sounds very personal, right?
Yes.
It sounds like a very personal thing in that sense. And it's possible that it can be all of these things at once. Let's continue.
So I would say our social and political systems that we've always had, and which have worked for us until somebody else decided that it wasn't.
Very good. So it sounds like manifestations of that thought. So not only are we thinking about it, but we're acting on it through our social systems, through our political systems. And then we may have been stopped by Eurasian invaders, Arabs, Europeans, from practicing those things. All right?
I was thinking of it as more of the culture and how the perception
Okay.
of Africans.
Okay. So the culture and the perception. So when we're talking about culture, we're going back to this idea of the manifestations of that thought. So if we think these things, that's why we do a libation. But if we don't see it that way, then it just becomes, here's a disconnected ritual, here's a disconnected dance, here's a disconnected this thing, and it doesn't really make sense to us until we see these commonalities and principles. So we'll actually come back to this idea, and I'll give my own thoughts about what African thought is a little bit later on. But I want to provide everyone with a good foundation for us to develop these ideas. I think everyone says something that is a part of it, right? And I think it can be all of these things at once. We'll come back to that idea as well. What is African worldview? I think we kind of touched on that. So let's actually get into what we're dealing with. Worldview informs thought. You mentioned perception. Again, the way you perceive the world is how you think about the world. And we'll come back to these ideas. Now, something that Couture mentioned is that if you want to go back to the origins, you have to go to the Nile Valley. So according to anthropologists and archaeologists, the oldest modern, quote-unquote, human being, the fossils Omo 1 and Omo 2, 195,000 years ago in the Omo River Valley, again in modern-day Ethiopia. So when we're talking about human beings, anyone who's human, at some point in time you were there. So then it just becomes a question of when did you leave? Did you leave 100,000 years ago? Did you leave 2,000 years ago? At some point in time, your ancestor was there, right? I got a chance to go to Ethiopia last year, and I went to a museum where they have Dinknesh on display, so-called Lucy, mitochondrial Lucy, the indigenous name Dinknesh, meaning that which is wonderful or spectacular. So again, if you want to go to the origins of what Africans thought, what human beings thought at that time, those were one and the same. Human beings were African and Africans were human beings. There wasn't anything else. Coming up into more recent times. So to go into that, I want us to go about 5,400 years ago or so to Kemet. I want you to take notes as well. Does everyone here know how to read and write? Is everyone here literate? Because I'll test you on that. You will notice that I went to great pains to also write out the Medu Neter for you, because in addition to discussing African thought, I want us to become literate. Your ancestors who dragged boulders for 200 miles and then carved 4 and 5 inches deep into it in stone just so that you could be able to read it, they wouldn't be happy if you are looking at it and say, look at those cute pictures. And then you only know how to read the characters of your conquerors in Latin script. So at the same time as being a course on African thought, as much as possible and as much as feasible, I will also incorporate the terms in Medu Neter. So this is Kemet, and this is how you write Kemet, land of black people. So looking from there, 3400 BCE to 343 BCE. This is before the Common Era. Also looking at Kush, 1000 BCE to 625 BCE, also Nubia. And this is how you wrote it, and then this is also the phonetic approximation of Nebut. This is where we get the modern term Nubia from in English. When we look at Kash, this is where we get the term Kush from, and this is how it was written in Medu Neter. And then Kemet itself. Europeans don't like to use the word Kemet at all, you will notice, because once they use the word Kemet, then you will say, well, what does Kemet mean? And it means land of black people. So they prefer to use the Greek term Egypt, which itself is derived from a term in Medu Neter, Hutkapata, and that's where you get Memphis. And then also you'll see a derivation of it in Aegyptos in Greek as well. So we'll continue.
Just a quick question. You have some years by the terms like anything of that. Can you briefly explain all those years?
Oh, this is the length of the civilization, when it started to when it ended. Ended in a sense of being conquered by invaders. So again, we're looking at the text from Theophile Obenga on Egypt and African philosophy. And with that, let me stop this. And in his text, he brings up different concepts and different ideas that are exemplifications of African philosophy. And one of them is the idea of Sebait. Sebait. Can we say that together? Sebait. So this is written teaching, instruction, wisdom, and pedagogy. Right? And the Seba, you see that is represented by what's called a triliteral. Do I have... Who's our class rep? Class rep? Okay. Yeah, yeah.
Well, if you have any objections, you still say that. Well, do you want to be like
Why does it not
I feel more comfortable giving my, some responsibilities.
So you're being selfish. Think about just you and who you're comfortable giving.
This gentleman.
we need to come to consensus. Whoever will be the class rep, I'll need a marker, a whiteboard marker. So, has it been decided?
So you are the last rep.
Okay, thank you, class rep. I think that is now consensus by authoritative utterance.
Yes. Dictatorship works when there's no consensus.
All right, so we'll work with that. So Sebait, written teaching, instruction, wisdom, pedagogy. Please write the Medunetra as well as the transliteration and the translation. So Obenga discusses this idea that there are formal systems of instruction as well as informal systems of instruction in the Nile Valley. And this was along with what was called Seba, which is the second one down. And this is the word, it's both a verb and a noun, teach and teaching. But you'll find that this word is related to the word for student and learner. Again, as we mentioned, as I'm teaching, I am learning, in the sense that I'm learning how to teach you, right? And you too, you are learning how to teach at the same time. So again, this is going to come to an idea of ma'at and reciprocity. So you can say this person is a teacher. Okay, well, if this is a teacher and he has students or she has students that are visual learners, that teacher doesn't know that yet, but will have to learn how to teach people who are primarily visual learners. So in the process of teaching, that teacher is learning, and vice versa. Another concept that he talks about is reh. Reh. Let's say that. Reh. And this is to know, to be aware of, to inquire, and to learn. It is also the word for knowledge and opinion. And the quote from the text is, human beings know by learning, that is through experience or conditioning, schooling or study. And you'll find a lot of these concepts interrelated. So wisdom was mentioned earlier, and there's an idea of wisdom as learning from experience. There's a proverb in Yoruba, Oju mewa oju eni, which is to say that the eyes of 10 people is not equal to the eyes of one's own eyes, right? So again, it's the idea of learning from experience. I could tell you all day long, don't touch that fire, it's hot. Don't touch that fire, it's hot. It doesn't make sense to you. But I bet once you put your hand in the fire, that's when you have wisdom. You've learned from experience. And you also look at concepts of wisdom, such as in Akan Chi, they have the word nyansa, nyansa. And some elders who were interviewed, they looked at it as the idea of dewanyana in sanda. What you have obtained, it never becomes finished, right? So this is something that I learned from experience. You can't take that knowledge away from me now that I know that this is hot, right? So that's rek. what's called a triliteral. And this is star by itself is Seba. So even though I wrote it like this, Seba, that I could also write it much smaller, just like this. And I can do Seba. And when I do this, I'm letting you know I'm talking about Seba meaning star. This is a stroke determinative. That means what I've written here, what it looks like is exactly what it is. Or I can remove this and let you know this is Seba as the abstract concept going into ideas of teaching and learning, right? And also look at this ref. This is a rolled up papyrus, where we get the word paper from. And whenever you see this, you know that what comes in front of it is an abstract idea. And these are what are known as determinatives. So when you see this, you know that this coming in front is an abstract idea, teaching as an abstract idea. Here, this is teaching, and this is a determinative that doesn't have a sound value, but it's there to let you know that this is instruction. And you see the teacher with a stick. Some of you who went through primary and had to endure that, this is the source of that idea, that teaching. If you don't hear with your ears, you hear with your skin. But again, this is abstract concepts. Let's continue. So Obinga goes on to discuss the ideas of knowledge, science, and philosophy. So there's a European myth of the Greek genesis of philosophy that is just amazing. Look, it just magically appeared there. Even though when you read the words of the Greeks themselves, they say Thales, their first philosopher, went to study in Kimet. There's a good book called Stolen Legacy that goes into this. So many other texts. Obinga himself goes into this as well. But again, the idea of philosophy. And another thing is, we mentioned Seba, the Sophos. The Sophos is not a Greek word. And this Sophos is actually a corruption of the word Seba. So to say the Greeks invented philosophy when the word itself is the idea of love of wisdom or love of knowledge. But even this word for knowledge and teaching doesn't even come from Greece itself. It comes from Seba, right? So how can you invent something and you don't even have the concept? Also, knowledge and science, Rites. And when you see this, it lets you know it's something feminine, this T here. Typically, words that end with T are feminine. And this is, again, knowledge, science, and philosophy. This is chet, things. And it works similar to like the word oro in Yoruba or in Sem, in Tree or Asem. Things, matter, affair, something, anything. All of this is encapsulated. So this is knowledge about things, knowledge about the world, knowledge about the things around you and how you relate to those things. So again, I'm bringing out certain key points to discuss them, and also so that you can see the Medunetra. But as you read through the text itself, you'll see him give an explanation of each one of these things and why he brings them up in the context of the origins of African thought. One of the core ideas in philosophy is the idea of good versus evil, or the idea of goodness. What is goodness itself? And again, this is something that African thinkers were thinking about over 5,000 years ago. And how do we know they were thinking about it? Because one, they were writing it down, and then also the word is preserved here, nefer, as goodness. And again, this is goodness as an abstract concept, as a noun. Right? Has anyone ever heard of Nefertiti? All right, that's the Nefer part of it. It can also translate to that which is beautiful. Another thing that Obinga discusses is, and again, he's introducing all these various concepts that show not only, it's one thing for me to tell you, oh, African people had philosophy. We had great philosophers, but what if I can't name any single philosopher? What if I can't discuss any single concept, right? If you look at Conscientism by Kwame Nkrumah, right? He discusses the names of so many Greek philosophers and their contributions, but when it comes to African philosophy and African thought, it's very vague that, you know, this is what African people think, this is what we do. Not to say what he's saying there is wrong, but it would be very important for us as African scholars to be able to, this is the concept, this is the name of the philosopher, this was the author, this is what he or she said.
Question about that.
Yeah?
Well, can we say because maybe in Africa, like philosophy, just like in art, is something of a communal thing, so you cannot just ascribe your identity to it. That's why we may not be able to come out with names.
This was one early argument to say that Africans did not have philosophy. However, you find that it's both and, that at certain times you do have authors who would sign their names to what they wrote down. And then even when you have oral traditions, you have storytellers who are putting their own imprint on it. You understand? So there are ways that literally, physically, the person can sign whatever they've written. And that's why we have the instructions of Ptahhotep, we have the instructions of Merikare, we have these names that we can mention, and we can actually read what the authors wrote down. And at the same time, there's an idea that these are communal texts at the same time. So again, we're going to come to this idea of complementary opposites, that is not necessarily always going to be either this or that. You know, and this was something that came up in the Negritude movement, the idea that reason is European or Greek, and emotion is African or black. And this, to say that is a very European way of looking at the world. All right, but we'll come back to that idea. So here we have upi, which means several different things. To open up. I want us to look at this idea of separating or dividing and judging or discerning. And this is a very profound idea that when you're judging, you are cutting something. And we find the same thing in Kikongo. The word zenga is to cut, but it's also the word for to decide. And then the word zengo is judgment, that which has been cut, that which has been decided. What's the link between cutting and deciding?
Well, you have to cut to see what's in there to decide when you want to go out. Pardon?
You decide that the art is not to cut.
To deconstruct, to construct, you have to deconstruct, to break it apart to see what's in there to bring it together.
Okay. Bernadine. Okay. Everyone say your names before you speak. I think I know everyone's name almost, but if I don't hold it against me.
I was thinking of it too in terms of to open, to decide and to cut something. It's almost like opening up something. And decision comes from knowing something and having to be decided and choosing between one or the other.
Okay. Good. Opening, choosing between one or the other, deciding, all these as related concepts. Any other ideas? There's no wrong answer to this. There may be a wrong answer. I haven't heard what you will all say yet. Somebody may say, no, that's just wrong. But feel free. Any other ideas? Deciding, cutting. Or are you just going to wait for me to tell you? Teacher. I'll give you an explanation. I actually got a chance to study Kikongo, and the instructor explained it like this. Let's say you have whatever it is, a piece of meat, a melon, whatever, and it needs to be apportioned out, that you have to decide where to cut. You have to make a decision. You have to make a judgment of what will be fair, what will be equitable. So this idea of cutting something open, you're opening this thing at the same time, you're making a decision, right? So again, for the Bakongo, all these are related concepts. You have this thing, but what are you going to do with it? How are we going to make a decision of where this should be made? right? So when I'm making a judgment, I've decided this is where the land is going to start, this is where the land is going to stop, right? So it's both tangible and it's abstract at the same time. It's kind of like a metaphor for this is that, this is that. Okay? And then also, so we find this same concept in Medu Neter in Kikongo, but then you find this word. So in Medu Neter, upi, and Wolof, ubi. Ubi, and this is the word for it to open, right? And one of the things that Sheikh Anta Diop did was he showed a lot of these correlations between Medu Neter and Wolof specifically, but other African languages as well. Theophile Obenga, whose work we're referring to now, he went even further in going throughout the entire African continent and showing these correlations between contemporary words now and those in classical Africa and Kemet. And again, we see a word derived from this. So this is the verb, and here we have upet, upet. This is now judgment. All right?
One major reason why the law courts judge always strike and indicate that decision.
So, and I think one thing that you will see is a lot of where Eurasians plagiarize straight from Africa. So when you see these wigs that they're wearing, one is ridiculous to be wearing a white wig, but when you look at that and then you look at what the Nesut, what the ruler of ancient Kemet used to wear, you will see very clear correlations. When you see the white crown of Upper Kemet, like this, and then you look at what the Pope wears. When you look at this crook of Kemet and you'll see what the bishops and popes carry, you will see straight plagiarism. And we tell you in school not to plagiarize, however you have so much that is just plagiarized straight from Africa. All right? But we'll come back to some of those as well.
Oh.
Yeah?
Here's what I take it back to this cat judge. How about looking at judgment as an abstract activity, cutting as the physical manifestation of the abstract activity?
Yeah. Again, I think that's right on point. That the two are not seen as being different. The fact that you're using the same word for both is letting you know that for me this is that and that is this. They are so much related that I'm using the exact same word to express them. Right? So I think that's very good. And again, when you come to the judgment, we're showing you that this is something abstract now. Right? So, and also in addition, that this can translate to judgment, it can also translate to a cut. So now the noun form. Right? So, upset, to specify something, to give the details of something. Again, this is something that is looked for in philosophy and philosophizing, to be able to explicate, delineate what these things are. And this is, again, the word. And you'll see that's related to the idea of judgment, the idea of having made that cut, right? Here you have wisdom and prudence, and one thing that Obenga discusses in the text is that you notice that the determinative, again, this is sat, and then this is just a determinative to let you know that it has something to do with this. So if you ever see a carver of the thinker, right? This is the idea of when I'm thinking about something, I'm doing like this. This is a very ancient concept, and this is again where they plagiarized that idea from. Also, you can find n. What does this look like to you? An answer? Anthill, okay. Octopus, no problem. What are you trying to say about my drawing? I'll show you what this is. This is how you express ignorance, lack of knowledge. When you don't know something, you do this. So whenever you do this, you're doing something that your ancestors marked out thousands of years ago, right? So again, you can see this body language as going way, 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 way back. This idea of sight, to be wise, to be prudent. And you see wisdom and prudence are the same word, right? Prudence is, what is prudence talking about? What are we saying? If I say you are prudent, what am I saying about you?
Being careful.
Being careful, good. Applying wisdom, good. Very good. And it's the idea of doing the appropriate thing in the appropriate context, propriety. You have to have the skill, right? And again, so skill, also wisdom. And you'll find that these are terms that are related in various African languages. So if I say, being, to use this term, being, it has a connotation of one to be well cooked. And that's part of the concept. Also to be skilled, to be wise, to have, you know, a deeper understanding about these things, right? I like the word wisdom because when you're saying prudent, you're talking about doing the correct thing at the correct time and in the correct context at the right place, right? And this is something that we talk about when we'll come to Ma'at here as well. So having wisdom, that means I've learned from experience. Let's say that the first time I came into the room, I just hit this guy in the back of his head. Then he knocked me out. I now have wisdom. I've learned from experience. So now I know that when I come into a room, don't slap this guy in the back of his head. Right? It's a very extreme example, but that's what we're talking about. I didn't know the correct time. There may be a right time to do that. I don't know. But I've learned from experience, wisdom, when is the right time to do this and when is not the right time to do this. So for example, we say, all right, I'm constipated, right? It would be a very good thing for me to be able to release the pressure, get it off my mind, right? So we could say this is something that's good. But is it always good? If I do that in the middle of the classroom during class, would that be good? It's ridiculous because we've said that this is good. We all nodded and said, yes, it would be good. But now we're talking about doing something that would be good in an inappropriate context at the wrong time and in the wrong place. So now what would have been good is now turned over to the other side. So again, the idea of someone who is wise and prudent as being sagacious and handling matters, exercising good judgment, propriety. And then this is Ma'at. Ma'at as a concept, an abstract concept, and Ma'at as a deity, a woman with an ostrich feather, right? If anyone has ever heard of Judgment Day, this is where the original idea of Judgment Day was, that your heart would be weighed against this very same feather of Ma'at, which represented truth, justice, righteousness, propriety, order, balance, harmony, reciprocity. I taught this some years back, and on the test I was asking, I'm going to ask you this, I was asking students, okay, what is Ma'at? They started just giving me all types of things. Happiness, love. I was like, no. It's not just anything that you think of, it's these things. And the fact there's one word that expresses these things, it shows that these are just different sides of the same exact thing. If you want to also read the 42 Declarations of Innocence, they are downstairs on a poster that's temporary on loan by myself and my daughter. All right, so again, Ma'at, and then Ma'at, so Ma'at as the deity, Ma'at as the abstract concept. I hope everyone is writing. You need to know how to write Ma'ats. So again, you find that the same word Seba it means so many things that are seen as being interrelated. In linguistics, there's the idea of areal linguistics. Areal linguistics, have we heard this term before? Areal, A-R-E-A-L. With the root being area, right? And in areal linguistics, it's the idea that in certain regions, there are various words that mean the same thing in that region, but once you go beyond that region, that correlation doesn't exist anymore. Can anyone think of something like that? That in certain areas, let's say in this region, you can use the same word for to eat food and to chop something else, right? That's not universal, right? But as long as you're in this area, and it could be across various languages, and you know this is a concept that has spread to other languages wherever it originated, all of this region. But once you go past a certain point, there's no longer that connotation where this same word means all of these different things, right? And I'm just illustrating, I'm using this to illustrate a point that these are concepts that are related, right? I'll give you an example. In Yoruba, there's a word, Ogun. Ogun, say that with me, Ogun. So this is the deity of war and iron, amongst other things. And then there's a word, Ogun. The tones are different, I hope you hear. Ogun. And that is the word for war itself, right? So the tones are what make that change, but you can see very clearly that these words are related conceptually and then also formally, right? And we find a similar thing here, that here you find these correlations, that the word seba, as we mentioned before, to teach and teaching as these concepts, but it's also a word for seba, door. So it's seen that teaching is metaphorically like opening a door, right? For the seba, pupil, the student, the learner. Again, we mentioned that learning and teaching are seen as different sides of the same thing. And I mentioned briefly, let me actually just write it. Wolof. Jangale, what do y'all think that is? Jangale. It relates to what we've been discussing. Jangale. It's a verb. Good. Teach. And then jump. This is also a verb. To learn. So you can see that for the pupil, there is that very close relationship. And as a matter of fact, growing up in the south of the United States, people would say, older people would say, let me learn you how to tie your shoe, boy. They don't say, let me teach you how to. For them, it's the same thing. Let me learn you how to do that, right? So this is Kikongo. Longa. Hope you all are taking good notes. Longa. What do we think this word is? Longa. Again, it relates to what we're dealing with, and it's a verb. Can't have. To teach. Longa. Longuka. What do we think that is? To learn. Very good. Let's come to Yoruba. Ko. What do we think this word is? Very good. Call. What do we think this word is? To learn. In this case, it's the exact same thing. The only difference that you can find is in the context of a sentence, how you would make the sentence, right? And then we see again here, seba. So this is something that we could say is an African aerial feature, even beyond the continent of Africa to the diaspora, as well as we gave the example of, let me learn you how to do that, right? That's a very wide area when we're going through the entire African world. And then finally, seba, star. And what Obenga does, he gives a short narrative to show how these concepts connect. So teaching is opening the door for a pupil to allowing the light as though the light of a star. So it's not just happenstance of, oh, we don't have enough words, let's just do this, let's just throw these together. Another example would be like, for example, in Akan, tre is both to teach and to show. So if I've done this thing, I've done that, I've just taught you how to do that. Just by showing you how to do it, I've taught you how to do it. And again, this is something, part of, we mentioned earlier, perception, that if you understand teaching in that way, it makes you understand apprenticeship entirely different, right? So if this person is learning how to be a car electrician, he is being taught how to do it, both through words, but also in studying capoeira, I went to Brazil some years back, and some classes were done differently, but in some classes they wouldn't say a single word the entire time. You just know that whenever they do this move, you do that move. So you're sitting there in perfect silence for like 2 hours, but you are learning, because again, this is a concept. If I've shown you, I've taught you. If I've taught you, I've shown you. There's an idea that each person teaches as he or she acts, and that's actually coming from the instructions of Ptah-hotep. The oldest book, we'll come to that. Oldest book, not in the sense of the oldest text, because there were some that came in front, that came before that, but the oldest surviving as a full text. At-seba. So at, this is a, this is the t, and this is letting you know that it's relating to a house, and then seba, house of teaching. So there are formal schools for instruction in ancient Kemet. And there are myths that are propagated by anti-Africans that in traditional Africa as well, there was no formal system of teaching. However, other scholars have come up and shown formal teaching through initiation systems, initiation schools, sometimes in buildings, sometimes outside of buildings. If you are in a shrine and you are apprenticing for 3 years, you are in a house of learning. And oftentimes there is no distinction between being initiated into the spiritual system and learning. This is being a house of learning, as it was in Per Ankh as well. Also, Tep Hesed. This is a very important concept because this is talking about what we now know as the scientific method. And one of the oldest mathematical documents on the face of the entire planet, this is one of the so-called Ren mathematical proprietors we'll talk about later. Tep Hesed. This is the idea of doing things in the correct way. This is methodology. So it's one thing for me to say, oh, in ancient Kemet we had methodology. I want you to actually see this is the word for it, so that when you're reading the text that your ancestors wrote, now you can actually identify this. So Tep being on the top of something, on something. Then Hesed has an idea of reckoning and measuring. Tep Hesed. So this is the correct method, the norm or standard of speech, conduct, rectitude. So once I have shown you or taught you how to do the thing, now this is the correct way to do it as established through Nyansa, wisdom, learning from experience, right? There's also the idea of the divine as being good. And we find this in Nefer, Necher. And one thing you will learn here, this is the Nefer part, this is the Necher part. You would read it, in this case, going from left to right. Middle Necher can be read going left to right, right to left, or top to bottom. In this case, you would read left to right. However, you'll notice that the Nefer comes after the Necher in terms of writing. Why is that? It seems like it would be backwards. Again, this will show you something about how African people are thinking about even their writing system and how it's structured. Do you think?
I think you mentioned something earlier about anti-clockwise, and that being in the African thought system.
We'll come to that. This isn't an example of that in this case because, again, it can be either way. I could write it like this, or I could write it like this. And then, so now this is a different word. This is Medu Necher. But again, you see reading in this direction and reading in this direction. The Necher comes first. Think like an African. You know the answer to this. You don't get the question? The question is, how come this is the Nefer part, this is the Necher part. The words are Nefer, Necher. Then how come the Necher is written first?
Probably because it relates to divinity.
Yes.
So the idea of divinity is definitely here.
Exactly.
What is less?
Exactly. Now you're thinking like an African. And you can see this in whatever African people do in any type of sacred context, that which is treated sacred, that which is seen as being revered, right? And that's the reason why in Middle Necher studies they call this honorific transposition. And basically whatever is sacred, whatever is divine, the word that is divine, you put that in the front. And it's so African to do it that way. All right?
And a question. Well, people say that maybe nature means writings of the divine. Divine writings.
Right, that's this one.
Yes. So that were they available to everyone since these were divine, or they were just available to a sect?
This is a very good question. As a matter of fact, myself and Prof. Asuma, when he was here, I'm not sure if you were here when he was here.
Thank you very kindly.
That he mentioned that, in Greece there was this guy Democritus, and he had the original idea of democratizing knowledge. And I went back to the Greek texts, and the Greeks themselves said, Diodorus, a Greek named Diodorus, said, if only in Greece we could learn, everyone would have access to writing like the people in Kimet, right? And then they were also saying that for certain types of texts, such as Middle Necher, there are some that in Kemet proper were restricted to the diviners, the priests. And then there was another form called Demotic and Hieratic that everyone knew. But in Nubia, everyone knew all of them. Everyone wrote with them. So not only the priests. So the further south you went, the more you had access to this knowledge, where people would, write on pots, people would write on everything. And a lot of those are still preserved to this day. What I'll do, I'll send you a thread, because myself and several other people on Abibi Tumikasa were just giving lots of different quotes from Greek scholars and then from in Middle Necher itself of actual primary source text. And this is why it's very important for you to learn how to read your own languages, because otherwise you would have to just take that wholesale. That, okay, well, I guess the I guess Democritus came up with the idea of democracy rather than what they said themselves. People who think that the Greeks are first, they don't like to read Greek scholars, because if they had to read the Greek scholars would tell you themselves that we went to Kemet to learn this.
I think this idea has a bit to do with that concept of reversibility theory somewhere, but then there's no essence. But essentially, if we have to go by what he's saying, then we go back to Eurocentric analysis, where the argument has been that most of these things were not things that were treasured for the ordinary people, and it was more or less quarantined for just the priesthood, a caste of the people.
But the historical record would go against that, because Imhotep himself was a commoner. The world's first multi-genius who built the very first step pyramid, who the so-called Ren mathematical papyrus, the Amos papyrus, is ascribed to. This is someone who was a pure commoner, had no royal blood, no royal lineage, but because it was a system of meritocracy, that those who are excellent are allowed to be excellent up to however high you can get. And in his case, he became the vizier, which was the highest position. So again, this is people who just say these things. They don't want to go to the primary sources, because if they go to the primary sources, it would debunk all of these things that they're coming
with that, because so-called classical philosophers had so much trouble with trying to code text in terms of textual analysis with this concept of what is and what ought to be. Because in African philosophy, that which is the divine, and that which ought to be is the human agency.
So we'll come back to these ideas, but just in short, what I would like for everyone to understand is go back to primary sources. If someone tells you that the Greeks originated this, go read what the Greeks said, either in Greek, or if you don't know Greek, read it in translation. What did the Greeks themselves say, right? If they're saying, oh, the Greeks came up with this idea of knowledge and education for everyone, okay, well, what happened to the son of Khufu, right? Where every single person in the age grade was brought and taught how to read, how to write, because it was thought that this would help with the governance system. Right. So again, once you read the actual source text, all of these things become a non-starter. But we'll move. Also the idea of nesit, which is kingship or rulership. And we prefer the term rulership because there were women who took this position as well. In English, king has a concept of male, but in Kemet you had Hatshepsut, you had so many others who were able to take this position as well, and especially in Nubia, further to the south, where women rulers was the rule, where they ruled singly, Amani Renas, Amani Shekento, so forth and so on, and they left their own writings in Meroitic.
How do you pronounce that?
Which one?
The last one.
Nesit. Nesit. So this is the nes, this is the eat, this is the e, and then the t, and this is letting you know it's abstract concept. A papyrus that's rolled up. So it's abstract literally, but abstract in the sense of something that requires you to go into. Oh, and I wanted to introduce this word as well in Yoruba, itumo. 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 And it translates to meaning in the sense of the meaning of something. But if you break it down, the word to is to untie, and then imo is knowledge, and then e makes it a noun, one single noun. And the idea of giving someone the meaning of something, you can picture knowledge as a bag that's tied up in the corner somewhere. You don't know what's in it completely. But itumo is the process of taking that out, untying it, and making it all plain. So even in every single word, you can look at the philosophy of the people, the deep thought of the people in every single word, if you have the mind to do so. And a lot of it can come out just by researching into the etymology of some of these words. We mentioned also the Tep Hesed, the correct method, and this is the Ames papyrus, so-called the Rin papyrus, because they like to name things after the thief who took it. So 20 arithmetic, 20 algebraic problems, fractional expressions, completion, second problems, linear equations, they're called AHA problems, prime numbers, geometry problems, multiplication of fractions. This is what you see right here in the background. This is Amos, the author. Right? 1550 BCE, original dates to the 12th dynasty reign of Amenemhat III, around 1860 BCE to 1814. Right? And as students of African studies, I was at a presentation in Ethiopia last year. And in the presentation, it was a white guy presenting, and he started talking about Euclid as the founder of geometry and this, that, and the third. And of course, I'm in the audience, so I have to raise my hand, and I corrected him. He didn't care for that too much. However, if you go to the text, you know that you are standing on what is correct, and they're standing on what is taught to everyone and what everyone says. And it's better to go with what's correct than just what everyone says. Very good. Also, you find the earliest definition of a philosopher. He or she is one whose heart is informed about these things, which would be otherwise ignored. The one who is clear-sighted when he or she is deep into a problem. The one who is moderate in his or her actions, who penetrates ancient writings, whose advice is sought to unravel complications, who is really wise, who instructed his or her own heart, who stays awake at night as he or she looks for the right path, who surpasses what he or she accomplished yesterday, who is wiser than a sage, who brought him or herself to wisdom, who asks for advice and sees to it that he or she has asked advice. This is an idea of what an ideal thinker, an ideal philosopher would be. This is the Tep Hesed. This is the correct method of being someone who would be known as a Seba or a Sai, a wise person. Right?
That's the word is related to sage. Sage.
In terms of etymologically,
English, sage, sounds like sage.
I don't know that for certain, so I won't say that. They both start with S. I'll say that definitively.
There's one more thing. I realized that what is written over there is masculine.
Yes.
In the original text,
Yes.
is it gender neutral or it's masculine?
There are certain times where it is in the original text gender neutral, but Medu Neter did have genders. So like at different points in time, it would be said one, it would be something like in Chi Obi, and that would be gender neutral, but where it comes to the pronouns, typically it would be to let you know it's feminine, and then pronoun to let you know it's masculine, he or she. All right, we continue. And this is coming from the inscription of Antef, 12th dynasty. This is about 4,000 years ago, before there was anything called Greece or before anyone ever thought of a Greek existing. And we were already coming up with definitions of what a philosopher is and should be. Also the idea of the heart, Eve. And you'll find that there's a text, Origin Commune, also by Obenga, where he shows correlations between Medu Neter, the word for heart, and the word in various contemporary African languages, such as in Igbo, the word for heart, Obi. In Akan Bo, so when you say Mbuefu, that's coming from the same Bo. So he shows it in all these languages going to Central Africa, Southern Africa, so forth and so on. Then hati. And it's an idea that heart, mind, understanding, intelligence, will, desire, mood, wish, thought, all of these are connected and they're associated with this. And Opene Ajikum, Prof. Kofi Ajikum, he does a lot of work on abstract concepts that are tied to specific body parts, right? In Akan specifically, of course. So one thing that you'll find is that this philosophical understanding of linking specific emotions and ideas, abstract ideas, with the specific body parts that are affected is something that goes way, 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 way back. You know, Opene Ajikum, he does it for metaphorical expressions of head, of heart, of all of these different things, of eyes, and so forth and so on. So in this case, and one thing that I would like to do in the near future is write an article on parallels between Medu-Neter idiomatic expressions for these abstract concepts and contemporary, and I'm thinking about primarily Akan, but other languages as well. So the heart, Eve, also Hati, in the Egyptian language was conceived as a seat of thoughts and emotions. The word for heart also meant mind, understanding, and intelligence. Reason, emotion, spirit, mind, and body were not conceived as separate antithetical entities. Matter and spirit were not opposites in conflict. Thus, in their inquiries, philosophers can draw on all their resources of their being, including reason and feeling. In this way, they can expect to achieve fulfillment. So there's not an idea of mind as separate and antithetical diametric opposites, which is something that you find as a core idea in Eurasian thought as a whole. It's an idea of complementary, right? Cartesian, exactly. So the European one, you can ascribe to Descartes, this idea of, and actually we'll come to it in the text Urugu, an African-centered critique of European thought and behavior. But you find this idea of compartmentalizing everything, and this is completely separate from this, never the two shall overlap. So we'll come back to that. And I mentioned that it's important for us to be able to name their names. There's an idea that the human being, one part of the human being is their name. And as long as their name exists, they will continue to live on, right? And sometimes you would read text from in Medu-Neter where it's an idea of, or they'll say, look, your name will live forever. Like you did this, you did this, you did all these great works. Look, your name will live forever. So this is Imhotep. Has anyone ever heard of Imhotep before? At this point, if your hand isn't raised, I will have to pull your hair and send you. So this is how to actually write Imhotep. So when you are talking to your colleagues who are not privileged enough to be taking some of these classes here in African Studies, they'll say, oh, African people never had any philosophy. Thales originated philosophy in Greece. And now you don't have to say, no, we had it. It was just, now you can actually mention some of these people. Imhotep. Harjadep, Kagimni, and Ptahhotep. This is how to write each one of their names. It's interesting that you have here the Ka, and other scholars have made this correlation before, that the Ka is seen as being what we call the soul, and Akan is called Okra. And reading like Jeche and Redu, other philosophers, they talk about going to elders and interviewing them, and they say that the seat of the Kra is the shoulders. And this is why in traditional societies you wouldn't lean on someone's shoulder, because it's seen as this is like a scale and a balance, and it can be thrown off balance. And if you are ever participate in rituals, you'll see that the person will take something like the adrensiu, which is a type of plant, and they will pat you on both shoulders. And the idea is that whatever may have thrown you off balance throughout the course of the year, I'm doing this on both sides in order to restore balance. If someone gets possessed, right? And you're not sure of who the spirit has come into them and it's not willing to identify itself, there are certain things you will pour libation on the person's foot. You will also be touching their shoulders to bring them back into balance. So this is something that is represented in the writing system as ka, and it still has this idea of the shoulders as being the seat of the ka, right? And these are seen as also being linked to, in Yoruba they talk about the ori, the head, and that's, you know, everything also which is seated on the shoulders. So what we're talking about is this edifice, the shoulders, and then also what is seated on the shoulders. And the word in Yoruba, ori, the root word of it is ri, which is to see. And this is seen as the great experiencer, that which sees, that which experiences everything. And this is linked to ideas of destiny and so forth and so on. Ptah-hotep. So here you see the Ptah coming in front. This is the deity Ptah, the creator deity, and then Hotep being peace. And in one of the texts, the Papyrus Beti, so-called, as cited in Obenga, books of wisdom, i.e. philosophy, were their pyramids, and the pen was their child. Is there anyone here like Horjadep? Here, the name. Is there another like Imhotep? Here, the name. They are gone and forgotten, but their names through their writings cause them to be remembered. So again, there's an idea, there's a proverb, and you find it in various African societies, but you would say something like, Onipa wa neketremanpro, which is to say when a person dies, his or her tongue doesn't erupt. And the idea is that they live on through what they've expressed before. They live on through those, amongst other ways that they live on. And we'll come to other ways that they live on. Early women physicians and scientists, yeah?
I'm just do some thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in Ghana, we say, Nufemo e Okonja.
Can you write it?
Yeah?
Can you write it?
I don't know, just my written Ghana. Nufemo e Okonja.
I mentioned before that learning and teaching is the same thing, so I plan on learning some Ghana, some Ewe, and whatever else we have in the room.
I'll use.
Everyone, let's say this. Nufemo.
Nufemo yo konjiami.
Yo konjami.
O konji. Konji is the shoulders. So being a man is in your shoulders. Now it goes back to what you just said about the shoulders and where your spirits and your powers lay. Well, I've just worked this out now because I always thought, when I heard that, I always thought it's about masculinity.
Physical.
Yeah, physical, macho. Based on what you just said, then it gives meaning to this.
Very good. And anything that comes to you like this, especially if it's in any African language, please do bring it. I don't know every single African language yet.
Yeah.
I'm on my way.
The word for teach, right? Show. It applies in Kasai, applies in Nandi. Yeah.
Would you write it, please? This is what we're looking for, right? You're not empty vessels to be poured into. You are here to contribute to the collective.
Yeah, this means teach. It also means show.
Right.
Yeah, and it's the same word for
Then
both
teacher,
times.
cholo.
Teacher is cholo. Right?
Chomo.
I think one should be offense.
Chomo. The same thing, chomo.
this is which one? Is
Teach.
And
teach.
show.
Okay.
Teach or show.
Show
Teach or
is
show. And I think in Dangbe it is Chomi.
Chomi.
Show. Yeah.
It's, I can remember this one because it's like show me. Show me.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So this is very good. And again, this is talking about going back to this idea of aerial linguistics. That all of these. Is it similar? Ewen? Show and teach. Please. This is, as I mentioned, as long as you're in this area, you find that even when they have different words, they have this concept that these two are related. And it may not be the same in every language throughout the world, but in this area, this concept has diffused. Excellent. You should be putting these in your notes. Before I go, I'll take a picture of the board. All right? So, again, this is when you are making these correlations in the language. The reason why I got into language is because of philosophy. I was reading Kwame Gyekye, I was reading Kwesi Redu, and I said, I need to know the language, the etymology of all these words to be able to understand fully this worldview. Right? Also, coming back to the worldview, Mary Pata, the earliest physician in human history, also the earliest scientist, female scientist in the history of all human beings on the face of the planet. Right? Has anyone heard her name before? You have? Good. But I bet we've all heard of Queen Victoria. Which one is more important? All right? So a lot of this information, this is what we call diseducation. We don't tell you anything about yourself. This is, let's just be objective. This is an extremely important woman and a very important accomplishment. So just saying, let's say we're not African, it's just important for every single human being on the face of the planet to know this. So for us not to get this in primary, it means that we've been abused.
Did you get this in primary school?
I got this from my parents. I went to public school, so I didn't get anything in public school.
So not all of us have parents like you.
It's true. It's true. And this is why we want to give back, so your children will be able to say, I had parents like that. Right? And then Pesachet. Has everyone or anyone heard of Pesachet?
Yeah. Right, there's a woman.
Wonderful. So that's one. So Pesachet credited as also an early female physician. And who in this room does she look like?
It looks like all of you.
It looks like all of you. You understand? So this is your own twin 4,500 years ago.
She was a mathematician as well.
Yes. Right? And again, these were not seen as being separate things. If you're in medicine, you are in science, and you are in mathematics, you have to learn how to do all of them. All right? And this is Mary Pata here giving offerings, and then this is Pesachet here. She looks like my first girlfriend in high school.
She looks like Amma.
Let me see. I need to show her this picture. Also, Obinga goes into key concepts in philosophy. Everyone deals with existence, right? Some philosophies, such as existentialism, talking about existence, right? This is one of the core ideas in philosophy. So we could say, oh, well, maybe in Kemet we didn't know about this. Maybe in the Nile Valley we didn't know about this. But the word is there, and also texts are there that talk about existence, right? So existence in Kemet was seen as a synthesis of rest and movement. So rest being hatet, peace, calm, rest, or being set. And a synthesis of this rest, and then shemet, walking, gait, movements, action, business. Right? You can see that here you have a determinative when you're dealing with movements. It's showing legs moving, right? Moving forward. Then you see this one moving backward. So you can get a sense of what's being talked about just by looking at it. But these have sound values. Shum, t, shum, t. And then this is the determinative. And this is plural. When you see these 3 marks here, these 3 strokes, it's letting you know plural. And Obenga gives an example. Now in the text, he just has the transliterations. So what I did before class, I decided to come and put in the Medu Neter so you can actually see the Medu Neter, because I feel like that's more important or more valuable than just seeing what the transliterations are. So here you see that this is a way of writing, but it's talking about existence in the future, in the present, and in the past. So pet, hari. So the sky existed when you were with me, and it's now talking about the past in that sense. Or it can be used to talk about the present. The sky exists and you are with me, present. And also, so long as heaven shall exist or the sky shall exist, you shall exist with me in the future. So you can get those 3 readings in the context will let you know. Yoruba works similar in the sense that you use the exact same form for both present and past, but the context lets you know what it is. Sometimes they'll use an adverbial to say yesterday, and then you say the sentence, and now you know that we've gone into this part. Or I say, or I leave it out, and I say loni, today, now you know we're talking about present, right? But this is the idea of existence. And just in terms of syntactic structure, you can find ideas. This is one thing that I talked about in Africanisms in contemporary English. That in Yoruba you have this word wa, which is to be. It's also to be located, and it's to exist. To be located somewhere and to exist. And then in Akan you have the word wa. Wa, also to exist or to be, located at a place. So in terms of how it works syntactically, you could say Nibolowa, where he at. And Himfa na awa, where he, she at. And then in Black English, so-called Black English, where you at? Where she at? You also find it in Wolof, but the form is completely different, but it works the same way in the syntax. Neck. For neck. For neck, where is he or she at? Where the at, the location and the existence comes at the end of the sentence. So you can make these correlations even in terms of how you say it and how it's conceived in the syntactic structure as well. We continue. Obenga also goes into ideas of stability and endurance. And they have what was called a jed pillar. So jed, this has a sound value. It's a cobra, it has a sound value of j. This is a hand that has a sound value of j. So jed. And then this has 2 sound values, which is both jed. So you can write it just by itself and it would be jed. But this makes it even more clear. And then you also have the concept of jet, which is eternity. And this is eternity in the sense of physical eternity, the expanse of the entire universe and space. There's another term, he, which is expanse in terms of time, eternity in that sense. So again, in terms of philosophy, you have a distinction between space and time. And then also in terms of matter, and this isn't here, but I'll write it for you. Het. And I think we mentioned it before. This is things, matter. It can also translate to business issues. It's like the word asem in P. And again, these are concepts that philosophers have been using. Oh, we're talking about time. We're talking about stability. We're talking about, is this something that endures? Is this something that's transient? Right? Also ideas of causation. right? This is Kepler, and this is a dung beetle, and she is called Cucurubinsine. The one who rolls around. Yeah, there you go. That's the word I was looking for. Now, why would this be used to represent existence coming into being, becoming, changing, occurring, happening, or coming to pass? Why?
Rules physics backwards.
Right.
Anything that is of bad sense, even if it is not bad, most often it goes backwards with individual activities.
Okay. All right. Any other thoughts? Coming to pass, coming into being, changing, something occurring, happening.
To add to what he said, what comes into mind is what beauty writes on the concept of time as an African sense of time. That we, unlike the Western view whereby it's, we look forward to the future, here we look forward to as in going to the past, as in being ancestors. So it's like you from the present, then you go into the past. So just as a beautiful
Okay. Thank you. Any other ideas? Nothing you say is wrong. Unless you say something that's just way off and I say, no, that's wrong. But don't worry about that.
Because maybe our existence is really not just based on the future and buttress of what he's talking about, but it's also based on the past, referencing the past to move forward.
Okay.
And maybe sacrifice something that comes to mind.
Okay. Is time like this? How is time like? Think like an African. Right?
Cyclical.
And we'll actually, our next slide will come to this, so this is right on time. But I will tell you why Kepler, the dung beetle, is used to represent existence coming into being, change. The dung beetle, it lays its eggs inside that dung. So the dung looks like it's completely dead. It seems like there's no life inside of it. Now when the Nile inundates and floods, all of those seemingly dead, dung balls, they come bursting with life as its young come out flying in all directions. So this is an idea of something occurring, changing, coming into pass, coming to being, right? And this is something that you'll find all throughout Kemet, this idea, and it's even one of the divinities, Khepri, right? And again, this is something that looks like it was dead. So it has a lot of connotations of resurrection, right? And that's why. So in a transitive verb, Kepler means come into being, change into, occur, happen, be effective, also go by, be past, always with the idea of continuity. Kepler also means, as noted earlier, to exist, to be. As a transitive verb, it means to bring out. The dynamic character of Kepler is generally clear. Its connotation contains a unity of being, becoming, and affecting. Within it, the gap between becoming and being is closed by virtue of affecting. In the universe, everything is full of power and effectiveness. The Kai is the dynamic essence of each existence or being in the universe. All right? We went camping up at Mampo and we saw some of these beetles. So I showed it to my children and I explained this concept. How something that looks like it's dead, it has life in it. And again, this is coming back to this idea of complements. Out of what seems like chaos comes order, and so forth and so on. So now, there's other things that Obinna touches on in his text, but I will leave you to read those pages. I said is, what is it, 31 to 49, whatever it is. That's already marked out on the syllabus. And now we're going into the introduction of person, divinity, and nature. And we'll try to take this as far as we can in the next 50 minutes or so. So concepts of the person, the human being as a living son. Now, this is what is called the Dikenga Diakongo, which you see written here. Is everyone familiar with this, Dikenga? This is what I'm wearing on my bag, Dikenga. All right? And this is how the people of the Congo express everything. And it's seen that the human being is like a living son. And in ancient Kemet, they used to write that the ruler, the Nesu, was. I actually wanted to put this in the slides. I did not do so. Sa-Ra. Sa-Ra, which is the offspring, the child of Ra, the sun. And basically the idea is that the human being was seen as a living son. What applies to the sun applies to the human. What applies to the human applies to the sun. Right? And again, this is an analogy. So let's explain. And I told you that we were going to mention this idea of so-called counterclockwise movements. And we'll come back to this. So here, actually let's start here in the realm of the ancestors. This is Kumpemba. Let's say that together, Kumpemba.
Kumpemba.
And when the sun is in this place, it is known as Musoni. Musoni. Good. So this is metaphorically like midnight. And it's also metaphorically like the ancestors, the realm of the ancestors, right? Because when you are standing here, Telama, you are standing here, you can't see the sun. It's on the other side of the earth, you can't see it. But even though you can't see the sun, does it still exist? It does. You're right. I'm glad you noticed that over these years. The sun still exists even though you can't see it at night. And it's seen again that the human being is like the sun and the sun is like the human being. So it's seen that the human being the same way when they die, even though you can't see them physically, that they still exist. One of the ways is through their name, as we mentioned earlier. Another is through their works, right? There are so many ways that they continue to live on through what they taught you that still exists inside of you, right? So that's Musoni. Now the sun comes up to the black sun, which is known as Kala. Kala, which is my wife's name. Kala. Let's say that together. Kala.
Kala.
Right? So this is representative of birth. It's also representative of dawn. Right? The sunrise. So what the sun does is that it rises. What the human being does is that the human being does the exact same thing. So when the sun first rises from our perception, it's not very strong, right? You can go out and work and you're not feeling the heat beating down on you. And it's sort of like a child. When a child first comes to the world, they're not very strong. But over time they grow. They come into the realm from Kumpemba up to Kunseke. Let's say that, Kunseke. Kunseke. So this is the realm of the so-called living. And this is the dividing line between them, Kalunga. Kalunga. This is the word for the supreme being. It's also the word for the ocean, the all in all, the all-encompassing. Kalunga. Right? So now you've come up into Kunseke, and you know that the sun, it eventually gets to the point of what we call noon, or in Kikongo, Tukula. Tukula. This is one of my son's middle names. And this is when it's at its strongest point, right? So when you're at middle age, you're at your strongest physically, you start to get that old man strength, you're at your strongest economically, strongest socially, in every single area you're strong. But this is a harbinger of what's to come. Once you're at your peak, that means that there's nowhere else to go but progressively to your sunset. And that is represented by the gray sun, November. November. And this, amongst the Bakongo, they said this grayness, it builds up in you and it starts to come out as your hair starts to turn gray and all these things. And it's also a representative of the ancestors. When we say Kumpemba, this is saying going towards the white clay. In Yoruba, they call it Efun. Here it's called Shire, right? This, when you see at spiritual ceremonies, people will put this white clay on themselves, all these things. It comes from the idea that the realm of the ancestors, Kumpemba, is the opposite of what this world is like. So whereas we're all black, there they must be the opposite, right? Here we walk upright like this. There they must walk upside down, right? And the origin of this idea you find in the coffin texts in ancient Kemet of you had a point in time where you went from the pyramid text to the coffin text. Right after we stopped building pyramids, you had a change where there were certain high officials who could afford to have their own burial chambers that were very elaborate. Right? Before, that was the preserve of just the ruler, because the ruler was Sa-Ra, the son of the sun, right? But now you had, and part of even building the pyramids were built to be in alignment with specific stars, or what were called the indestructible stars, because they were around the North Pole and they never set below the horizon. So whereas everything else set, right, these were stars that never set. So you wanted to be in alignment with those stars. The idea was that when the ruler dies, the ruler goes off to join those stars and will live forever. But you had a shift in thinking from there being the afterworld to the idea of, well, we're all buried, that the afterworld, the afterlife must be under, right? So when that thinking started to shift, that's where you start to get these ideas came up. So once you start to make these correlations, you can get an idea of when specific people migrated away from the Nile Valley. Like, do these specific people in contemporary Africa have an idea of there being the afterworld? Like for the Yoruba, the afterworld is Orun. And it will give you an idea to some degree that perhaps they migrated before the shift occurred, right? And then you have others who talk about the afterworld being here. Then you would start, and you can go to other things to try to substantiate that, but this can at least start to get you thinking, well, if these people are saying the afterworld is here, most likely they migrated away after this big shift, right? And again, Kumpemba, there's in Kikongo, they say, Wendam Pembam Polo, go in the way of the healing white clay. And again, it's the idea that the ancestral realm is the place where this healing clay comes from. This is something that if you go to different rainforests, we're actually looking at a documentary. I homeschool my children, as you know. And we're looking at a documentary on the macaw, like a type of big parrot-looking bird. And they're able to eat fruits that are poisonous, because after they eat them, they go to the riverbank and they take this white clay, and it has these absorbent properties. If you've ever had a stomachache or whatever and you've taken this white clay, what it does, it absorbs whatever types of poisons are in your system, so forth and so on. Charcoal does the same thing. And that is what we have here. This is the Kala, this is the Luvemba, and they're seen as complementary opposites of the same side. This is birth, this is death. Outside of Kumasi, there's a place, the Black and White Power Shrine. And when you go, for whatever the thing is, they will perhaps make these marks, incisions in you, and they'll rub this black into you. And what it's doing is it absorbs whatever toxins are in your system. Or, you may have to put on the white clay on your body, and what it's doing is absorbing whatever toxins are in your system. So it's very scientific. It's, again, the idea of wisdom as having learned from experience. So perhaps you saw these birds who were able to take in things that were poisonous and not die, right? And so forth and so on. And then Mukula, this is seen as the line, the rope that connects the living and the deceased. And Mukula literally translates to inside of growth. The Mu is the same inside that you have in Chi, and it's there in Kikongo. And it's also the same inside that you have in Merunecha. So the way to say inside is this it has a sound bite of
So that means that afterlife, it's in different positions depending on the group of people and their migration. So it's not just under, for others it can be about.
yeah. And you find this throughout the continent. And basically, people have different ideas. And even you see in Kemet is one civilization. But over time, there was a shift, a paradigm shift in terms of where we conceive of the afterworld as being. At one point, it's only the ruler who can get to it, and it's up in the sky near the North Pole, around these stars that never set. But now, at a point in time where everyone has the financial wherewithal to make their own burial chambers, they made it something that not only the ruler can get to, but all of us are going to be buried, so we can all get to the afterlife. And I'm going to write that in my coffin. And these, in the book of Coming Forth by Day that the Bible and other texts plagiarize from, you find this idea of judgment, of we all go through a judgment, these ideas of Ma'at and so forth and so on. Right? So that's that. Now, these are the transformations of Ra, the sun, and Khepri. So this is the dawn. Ra is the sun at its highest point. Itun, this is sunset, and then Usir, which is in the midnight realm. And one thing you'll notice is that here in Kemet, and basically it's dependent on where you are in relationship to the equator, right? And we'll come to this because the way the stars appear to move to you is different in the northern hemisphere versus the southern hemisphere. So we'll come to that idea very shortly. But here you find this idea of the east being on the left. So Khepri, the sun rises on Yabi, and it sets in Imanet, right? So basically the way we look at the world is upside down, and then upper Kemet was in what we now call the south, and lower Kemet was in the north. So Europeans just arbitrarily said, here's a sphere, this is the top of the sphere. How can you tell me, I have a ball, how can you tell me which side is up and which side is down? It's very arbitrary, but it's intentionally going against what the Africans said, because you're facing towards your source, your point of origin, which was in Upper Kemet. And you have your back to what is irrelevant. And if you look at various African languages, you use the word ehi or echi to express something that you have disdain for, something that is unimportant, something that is hated, all of these types of ideas. So echi related to the root verb chi, to hate or despise, right? So these are the rites of passage, the 5 main rites of passage. And in Personal Divinity and Nature, he doesn't mention eldership, but we've inserted that in there. And I have a text that also talks about eldership. So birth is Kala. Initiation is once you come out of childhood, you are here. Marriage is where you're starting to get to here. Eldership is where you start to get to here, and then ancestors. And this is seen as analogous to the movements of one's own life, the movements of the sun. Also, the universe is seen as having progressed through these stages, right? So this as the beginning of the universe, and then it eventually comes to this point here, here. And basically every single thing that exists is seen as progressing through these stages. A year or two ago, I did a seminar here on Anansi stories and Ijapa stories, and I was going through this exact same thing, that we can look at stories as coming from their beginning, coming to the end here, but then they go down into this realm. I stopped telling the story, but did the story stop existing? You remember it, you understand? You can retell it. When it's retold, it's being reincarnated. Perhaps it looks different. And again, this is, we'll talk about this. When you look at the word nana in Chi, a lot of the examples I give are going to be from Chi for Yoruba and from Wolof, for obvious reasons. Those are my main three. But the word nana, what does nana mean? What is the core meaning of nana?
Your grandparents.
Grandparent, right? Now, if you have a child who is just born, can that child be nana yao?
Yeah.
How?
Because I think what happens is that they give the child the name of the grandparents, so they are kind of appropriating greatness onto the child's life. Because I mean that's what it all it serves as a store of to remember the past.
That's one way of looking at it, yes?
And also maybe some form of reincarnation.
This is it. This is why the person is called Nana Yao, Nana Kwame, Nana Ama. This is why in Yoruba you have names like Tunde, again arrives, Tunji, again wakes up. And you find this throughout the entire continent, because even though not everyone puts it in these terms, where it's written out like this, every African people understands this and operates based on this. This is why we pour libations, is because of this. Even though the sun isn't visible, we know it still exists. These are things that, as African people, we take to be self-evident. So it's not like, oh, this isn't really them. This is them. I have a colleague who was what was called Abiku, who was born and died and born and died. And they made these marks on the face after the child died the first time around. It came back and it already had the marks on the face. It seemed like this is the person. And this is why, even though you have the Kradin, the soul name, it seemed that the Kra and the Sun Sun are uniting again. So when this unification happens, it seemed that you retain the soul that you had last time. So you may be born on Friday this time around, and you would have been called Kofi, but we know that this is Nana Kwajo. This is why elders are the ones who give the names, because that elder was a child the last time they were here, and they recognize their own grandparent when they come back. And that's why the grandparent will refer to the child as Menana. So it's not only grandparent, it's also the word for grandchild. The two are the same, right? So the naming system tells you a lot about how we conceive of the world. We continue.
Just something short, like looking at that diagram we had earlier, it really reminds me of coming into contact with the Malis. I think the First Nation community, as in Canada, like they have a similar as a concept of rites of passage or creation. Of they also use this simpler, and for them it's more about using the what do you call it, the seasons, spring, autumn, and all that to explain that. It's interesting. It's like it's the same concept, except I was really paying attention when the child was reading it. So
This is the thing. Everyone is looking at the same sun. So, and this is basically the only story in terms of all these religions. So even Christianity is just the story of Heru, the sun. So we talk about 12 disciples, you're talking about 12 constellations. When you're talking about death and resurrection, you're talking about the sun at its lowest point at the solstice and then starting to rise again. When you're talking about Easter, you're talking about the days coming longer than the nights. So they just plagiarize the whole story of how the sun moves. That's just given to you as a metaphor. They haven't come up with any new story. Everyone is looking at the same sun and then coming up and either telling you that it's a metaphor, and when you grow up, we'll tell you all those stories we told you. Now look around, you understand everything. If you heard the story, now you understand everything. So either they tell you that this was just to help you understand creation, or they tell you this is real and just believe it, otherwise we'll chop your head off. Right? But it's still the same story. Yeah?
So, for instance, when babies are born, this I'm trying to
Process it.
parallel.
Yeah.
You know, so babies are born and we say, I'm in church, which is the dawn, the early morning sun. And that's what is here. Right?
Yeah.
Now, the second one is about the naming. The Ghans also have a naming system where you there are two lines of names. So you give your father's name, and your son gives your name. And by the time you're done, you have your grandfather's name. So there are two lines of names. The naming system has two lines. So I'm Alote. My father is Paco. If I have a son, the first son is going to be called Alote. So my first son actually has the same, my first son is going to be called Paco. My first son has the same name as my father.
Yeah.
Right? So
so it's like it's going here.
It goes back to the same Nana.
Yeah.
And Nana and Nana.
Exactly.
Yeah, Minana and Minana.
Right. Right. And basically the idea is that you two keep this same relationship. So as you're traversing the world on the upper realm, your grandparent is traversing the underworld and coming back. Yeah. If the son does it, that's what we do as well. We continue. And this is seen as a metaphor for what happens every single day. So these are the principal hours. In Kikongo and Seluka is dawn. Kinsamina is where we're talking about initiation. So you don't get circumcised right here. You go into adulthood, which is this realm here, at your initiation. So all throughout the continent, people do initiation ceremonies at this time. So the Krobo, so forth and so on, everybody. And then you get to the highest point, Mbata, Nsinsa, and this is where you get to eldership. And again, this isn't mentioned in the book, this part, but this is where you would become a traditional ruler. This is where you would, get whatever title that you would get. And this is also a very significant portion as well, because each time is like you are starting to get initiated into this side, which is the side of passing on, Lufwa, death side. Indimina, this is sunset. This is Malo Matulu, and then Ngudiansi, Makielo, and then back up to Seluka. So again, you have analogies, extended metaphors. And this idea of analogies and extended metaphors will also help you to understand creation stories. And we'll come to that as well. But when we talk about the primordial waters, that's the metaphor for the womb. When you talk about either a mound came up into it, this is a metaphor for the phallus. And it's the idea that it takes feminine energy and masculine energy to be a creator. And creation is something that keeps happening over and over again. All right? And again, you can just see this. You have dawn, sunrise, you come around, twilight, and this. And these four are known as the major hours. And this is Lobiangudi, from Ngudi, which means mother. So these are the mother hours. And Lobianduelo, which is the small in-between hours, which are these ones here. All of them are significant portions. And as you're going through your initiation here, your grandparent is going into their initiation there. And there's a smaller initiation. Being given a name is a smaller initiation. Once we know that you are here to stay, then that's when you really pass from this one into that one. But you may not stay because these people here are trying to save your life or save your death. So they're giving you CPR. They're like, no, please don't die, please don't die. Eventually you die there and you come here. And I kind of call it Nasamai, which is the mother spirit, the one who gives birth. They're on that side. Right?
And I would assume that perhaps that is why we also wait for 7 days before
exactly.
we have a child.
To know whether you're really going to stay.
Yeah.
And you hear things like Wabawa Joko, so Ban Joko, stay with us is a name, or Bantale, stay with us until night. And this idea of, like, when you say Aoro Ojo in Yoruba, the morning of one's day. And that's the way you say literally the morning of the day, but also the beginning of a person's life, right? If you say Wanya Eriyawu, the person died in the sunshine, you're saying that this person, had a sudden death. But again, you have this idea of grafting one onto the other. The course of the day is analogous to the course of one's life, right? And then also coming back to this idea of so-called counterclockwise, if you stand in one position over 3,000 years, you look at the precession of the stars, these are the constellations, you'll notice that from where we were in Kimet, they appear to go in this counterclockwise fashion. And if you ever go to an Akom or any spiritual ceremony, you'll see that they move around in a counterclockwise fashion. When we do capoeira, when we have a brief interlude, we move around in this counterclockwise fashion. When we shake hands, we do it in this counterclockwise fashion, because as above, so below, that we are in alignment with the cosmos. So it's not like, oh, they're just doing something cute. No, this is a deep understanding of how all of these things work in order. So down here, we also want to be in order, right?
So when you hear the sunlight, sorry, the sunset of your life and the twilight, are you saying it's coming from the cosmos?
Yeah. Yeah. And also we have key divinities in the creation story, and this is mentioned in person, divinity, and nature, that originally there was noon, right? In a lot of African languages, the word for water tends to have either mu or nu inside of it, or to drink or something related to liquid or water tends to be this, mu or nu, right? I think we have that in God, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is the primeval waters, the primordial where there was nothing but water. But inside the water came, and it depends on what period in time. At one point in time, they said it was Atum, the sun that came out. At another point, and that was sun at sunset. Another one said that it's Ra that came out. But basically what you have is a metaphor. The way we know creation works now is how it must have worked then. So if I know that here is a womb, that's the waters, and then the sun came up into the waters, right, creating itself. And now, and in the Yoruba one, and you'll read this one in the text as well, they talk about how there was nothing but water, and Oduduwa descended on a chain, or some say Orunmila descended on a chain, with fowl and some dirt, threw the dirt down into a mound, and then the fowl spread it out. What you're saying is a very euphemistic way of saying intercourse, sexual intercourse, right? Where this represents the phallus, it goes into the womb, it spreads out, that's the sperm, and now you have one, and from the one comes two, and this is what we know now in science about cellular division. You have the two have united into one thing, right? It's one egg. We're talking science, quote unquote modern science. Then that egg divides into two. Then the two divides into this four, this first four. And then those four divide into this 8, right? If you read the Dogon, and we will, Conversations with Ogo Tumeli, he talks about the exact same thing. If you go all throughout the continent, they talk about water, they talk about something, a mound or a sun or something comes into the water, and then you have 2, then you have 4, then you have 8, then you have 16, and so forth and so on. And now Europeans come to us with the exact same story, except instead of calling it Shu and Tefnut, they say cells. They say, oh, that's magic. How did you come up with that idea? And this is what we've been saying for years. Now they're just looking at it under a microscope. And now we're saying you all are magic white people. So Shu and Tefnut, this is air and moisture, right? Geb and Nut, this is the earth, this is the sky. And Geb and Nut gave birth to Usir and Oset, and also to what they call Nephthys or Nebethut, and Seth. And Seth killed Usir and Oset. I'll briefly go into the story, but it's here on the text. That Seth was jealous of Usir and his sister wife Oset and wanted to marry his sister wife. So what he did is he invited Usir to a gathering and then attacked him and cut his body up into 14 pieces and threw them throughout Kemet and then threw his phallus into the Nile River. So out of her love, Oset gathered those pieces together and she created a tekken, what we now call an obelisk, like the Washington Monument and what you see all throughout Europe that they stole from Africa, which is representative of the phallus. She transformed herself into a kite and alighted on this tekken that she had created. And from that, that's the first idea of immaculate conception. So she became impregnated with the sun, Eru. Usir. That's how you write it in letter nature. So this idea of death and resurrection, and Usir can be associated with the crops, that the crops go through a period where they grow, they die, and then eventually they come back. So these are these concepts that you find all these other religions plagiarize. The ones that came after straight plagiarize. Sometimes if you put it and turn it in, you would have like a 90% score. You would say you failed. Right? Nile Valley Contributions to Civilization shows some of those direct correlations. Also, Usir was associated with the constellation called Orion, or Sa in ancient Kemet. And that's the one that looks like these 3 stars here, right? And Aset was associated with a star here called Sirius or Sopdet. So if you look on December 25th, this line points to the exact place where the sun will rise, and the sun is Heru. So this is the father, this is the mother, and then this is the son. And this is when it's at its lowest point. Eventually, at the time of the spring equinox, equinox means that the days and nights have equal hours, and then eventually the days become longer than the nights. In the northern and southern hemispheres, we call it summertime, right? So all of these things are just people looking at what's actually going on, and then they're coming up with an analogy to explain it in a form that even a child can understand. Then when you grow up, you become initiated, and then they tell you this is what that really meant. It wasn't a telenovela drama. Look at this. Look at the sun. So me and my daughter, we do stargazing, and we actually see these things going on. Again, so birth, an extended analogy, the primeval waters as the womb, the serpent as a phallus. You find a lot of creation stories where the origin of procreation is linked to a serpent. That should be a very clear analogy to everyone. So the serpent is representative of the phallus, right? There's a text, African folklore, I'm going to say, Harold Corlander is the editor, and in it he talks about Bosumru. So the Bosumru is one of the Intro lines. So a lot of people know about the Abusian, but not too many people know about the Intro. So the Intro is Bosompra, Bosomchi, Bosomafram, Bosominketia, so forth and so on. All of them start with Bosom. And these are 12 patrilineal lines. So everyone gets their Intro from their father's side. Everyone gets their Moja from their mother's side. Now, with this, they talk about how procreation first came about, that the first man and the first woman, they said, oh, the woman has a problem. She gets sick every month. She bleeds. So they went to the wise snake inside the Bosumru River, and it's a Eninin, the python, right? So it says, oh, how do we cure her? She's sick every month. So the python, being so wise, said, stand here, I'll come back. Went into the Bosumru River, got some of the water, and then came back and sprayed it on her belly. Koosh, koosh, koosh. And then instructed them that they should go and sleep together, not separately. They have to go and sleep. And all of a sudden, the next month, she was cured. She didn't bleed at all. And that maintained, but eventually her stomach started to get big. And then 9 months, and here you had a baby. So here's the idea of a snake. You find this in other traditions that plagiarize from Africans. You have this idea of the forbidden fruit and snakes and all this all throughout the world, because it's just a metaphor, right? It's just a metaphor for what men have. And sometimes it's, you know, what the woman has is an apple or something, whatever it is, something sweet that the man or the snake wants. But again, you find this right here in Akan. Now, I had a Chi student who lived in Kumasi, and he was asking me what's Bosomru, and I explained all these things to him. Also the patrilineal line, the Bosomru line. And he was going around Kumasi, no one knew what he was talking about. They're like, no, it's just a title, because Kofi Annan is Bosomru. And that's all they knew. Like, well, what is the Bosomru that he is? And that's the patrilineage of every Asantehene. They have to come from Oyokwo matrilineage and the Bosomru patrilineage. and they have to have both of those. And no one knew it. So this is just telling you, and then he started to explain it to them. Then they went to their grandparents, and their grandparents, yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. But it tells you how people are losing this thing. In your email, you were saying, people say, oh, you're studying African studies? Let's talk about it. I was like that because I had read all these African philosophy things. I thought I was just going to be able to sit with people and discuss the difference between Sun Sun and Hong Hong on the Torotoro, and people were like, I don't know what they're talking about. Also, this idea of twins, analogous to division of cells, that in all of these different African stories, the originals were twins, a male and a female, male and female, male and female, twins to 4 to 8, and so forth and so on. Now, the way twins are viewed throughout Africa depends on how you view that. If you see the continuation of twins now as being divine because we're doing what was done in the beginning, then you see sacred twins like amongst the Yoruba. But if you see it as that is something that belonged to that time and it shouldn't happen again, then you have what the Igbo would do with twins. But all of them have the same fundamental idea that in the beginning you have 2. Cellular division, you have 2 becomes 4 becomes 8. Should that still be going on now, or should that be relegated to that past time? Depends on how you look at twins now, right? Also, the idea that the womb and the ancestors are one. This is something we were looking at Daughters of the Dust a year or so ago, and in it, Nana Pezant said, the ancestors in the womb are one. She's trying to tell them this deep African philosophical idea that you saw in the Dikenga. So again, time is not like this. At one time, Europeans thought time and space and matter were like this. They thought that the world was flat, and they thought that time was flat. Africans, because we traveled around the world, we knew that all these things were like this. So now Europeans have updated to know that space is like this, that the earth is round, but they haven't updated their concept of time. They still think time is flat, like they thought the world was flat. Because perceptibly, if you just look out, it looks flat. So does time. It looks flat. But once you are the oldest people on the face of the planet, you know that what I saw before has come back around again. There's something called the precession of the equinoxes that we don't have time to go into, but that's that idea. So reincarnation in names, Tunde, Tunji, Nana, grandparent and grandchild. So birth as reincarnation, Abiku, Obanje amongst the Igbo. Different parts are reincarnated amongst the Akan, the Okra, and the Sunsum are reunited. So seeing that when you die, your Sunsum becomes the Osamain, and it goes back to your father's house waiting to be reincarnated. So the woman gets married and enters that house, and the different Samanfor that are in that house are the ones that will reincarnate. And the Okra that comes from the Supreme Being will unite with that. You keep your old Kradin in your Nkrabia, your destiny that's associated with it. Destiny not meaning fate will go into that as well. But those reunite, and now you get a different Moja. But even the Moja, the Earth is more or less a closed system apart from meteors that have hit it. That means that everything that you're made of, whether it's hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, all these different things that make up you, you have the same physical parts that a dinosaur had, that a tree had, that this isn't new stuff that hasn't been here before, right? So this shirt that you're wearing, at one point in time, it was a plant 1 million years ago, right? So again, all of these things are seen as reincarnation. They're just seen as the thing coming again, just in a different form, right? So elders name the newborn, the reluctance of the child to be born, and this is my daughter's name, Akosia Sunkwan Abaye Oke Alara, Naiwala Akombi Kimpwanza Kukinyaki Sakamba. Each one of them has a very specific meaning, but the reason why she has Sunkwan and Abaye, actually all of them, so Akosia, she was born on Sunday, that's obvious, and Sunday borns are seen as being leaders. So you have the name Obiakwine, the opener of the way, and Bodria, which is the animal's tail, so seen as being leaders, the nose, and the protector. So that's also why the Kwesiada begins the week and closes the week. It's both the front and the back, like this. Right? So my daughter was born at home. Her mother delivered her by herself. I was teaching a class. When I came out of the class, my wife was sitting in the bathroom with the child on her leg. I said, okay. However, the challenging part was the child was not breathing, right? Her body was completely limp and cold, and she appeared by all means to be dead, stillborn, right? So what I did at that point, I had a, what do you call this? Aspirator. And it looks sort of like an enema thing. So I went and got that, and she was born with okay, which is the veil, the not the placenta, the amniotic sac over her head. They're said to be seers, especially in the diaspora. We see them as being visionaries. So she was born with that, and because she was born still in the sac, she had breathed in some of that amniotic fluid. So what I had to do was take the aspirator and push air in, right? So now air started to get into